Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. We are going to be joined by my friend Dr. Matthew Bunson, and Dr. Matthew Bunson is Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and he joins us to talk about church news and current events in light of church teaching. Matthew, it's great to have you with us. How are you?
Oh, great to be with you. As always.
Yeah, it's really good to reconnect with you. So we've got our work cut out for us today, and
yes, we do.
I want to start with something that you and I had talked about in private that we sort of expected was going to happen, and that is Pope Leo's return to the papal apartment.
Well, that's right. This is actually it. So I'm glad that you're sort of starting with the fun and good news. Certainly, as you mentioned, the headlines coming into the hour. No, you're absolutely right. So it has been a fairly lengthy process of renovation, but Pope Leo XIV had been really signaled almost from the day of his election, has moved back into the official papal apartments. So it's basically the apostolic palace of the Vatican. Popes have lived there on an absolutely consistent basis really since Pius X, and that goes back to 1903. Pope Francis, as the one very conspicuous exception to that, very famously eschewed living in the Apostolic Palace and instead remained in the Casa Santa Marta, which is the Vatican guest house, where he stayed during the conclave that elected him Pope in 2013. As you can imagine, as we saw also with the pontificate of Pope John Paul II, renovations are needed from time to time. They were done in 2005, and after 12 years of being used pretty much only for his weekly Angelus, Pope Francis left behind some work that needed to be done, and that's exactly what's been happening. That work is now finished, and Pope Leo XIV will be able to move into what is his new home and will be his home for the duration, apparently, of the pontificate.
You and I had spoken about this in the past, and so I want to invite you to share not just your salient wisdom, but how tactfully you speak about this. Can we talk about how Pope Francis's decision actually caused some security concerns and even financial strain on the Vatican in order for him to not reside in the papal apartment?
Yeah, so it certainly was his privilege as Pope not to live in the Apostolic Palace. Now, the reasoning that was given certainly was that he didn't want to feel isolated, as can happen in the Apostolic Palace. He was, as time is marching on, a very singularly unique pontiff, and so it probably came as no surprise even then. His decision to remain in the Casa Santa Marta was his right to do as Pope. It came, however, as you know, with certain consequences. The first and most immediate was that in order to keep him safe in what is a very different world now, it basically shut down the entire second floor of the Casa Santa Marta. That meant that you had to bring in security, you needed to close off basically a number of rooms, which meant that rather than making money, because people do actually pay to stay there, it's not open to anybody. You can't go on like hotels.com and make a reservation of the Casa Santa Marta, but there are fees that are involved in people who stay there. So that was lost immediately. Then you had the modification costs for the floor. Then you had as well the various other problems that accumulated over those 12 years, including the need for extensive hospital equipment and other things as Pope Francis's health deteriorated. I've seen estimates in the hundreds of thousands of euros that were lost by his decision to stay at Casa Santa Marta. But again, that was his decision to make, and he felt that the cost was worth spending. Pope Leo made the decision then that he was not going to stay at the Casa Santa Marta. Notably, as an interesting side story, in the last near year since his election, he's actually remained where he typically lived, which was a small apartment in the Vatican's Palazzo del Sant'Uffizio, which is the headquarters of the Holy office, as it used to be called, the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith, but also has a number of private apartments for Vatican officials, which he lived in while he was serving as prefect for the Dicastery for Bishops.
Now, like you mentioned, this is good news that Pope Leo is returning to the papal apartments. We're going to have to go to news that's not so comforting, to say the least, that has to do with the partial retrial of what was once called the trial of the century. So you'll have to refresh our memory what the trial was about, and then let's talk about the retrial.
Well, let's first apologize to everyone in your listening audience, because this is incredibly technical stuff. And if you really like Vatican trials, this is the news for you. And if you like trials in general, this is the news for you. But for many other people, this is basically legal mumbo jumbo. But the upshot is that the Vatican Appeals Court declared, now there's an important word here, a partial mistrial in what has been a very high profile case of financial misconduct on the part of Cardinal Angelo Beccio. Now, there's a name that some people will remember, and I think about 7 or 8 other defendants. It cited in its decision a number of procedural errors by prosecutors in the Vatican trial that led in 2023 to their conviction and a jail sentence for the cardinal on several counts of financial embezzlement. Now, it's a ruling that came down just a couple of days ago, and it's remarkable in the sense that the reasoning behind it is that it basically invalidated many of the aspects of the testimony and investigation that led to the ultimate conviction. So however, than doing two things it did not do. First, it did not invalidate the entire trial. In other words, this wasn't simply declared a mistrial and everything has to start over again. It invalidated certain parts of the proceedings, the original proceedings, and it left in place the effects of the original ruling. So in other words, those are still in effect. So Cardinal Beccio still faces potentially, I think, 5 years in prison, and $8,000 would be the equivalent of an $8,000 fine and other things. But here's the other aspect, and I think we can touch on this as a bit too, is that it has called into question several what are called rescripta, which are papal decrees that were used by the prosecutors to expand their investigative powers in what's called the Office of the Promoter of Justice during the investigations. Now, the reason that those have been called into question is because they were not published, and this is where it gets really technical, in a timely manner, and were not disclosed to the defense, or actually were shown to the defense only just before the original trial began, meaning that the defendants were deprived of very crucial information during the investigative phase. Now, this has raised a number of serious questions about what Pope Francis did, not that he's being accused of anything improper, but that the decrees or rescripta that he issued may not have the force of law because of the way they were actually issued, and because of the failure on the part of the prosecution to disclose very important details to the defense.
As a kind of final concern, because we don't want to get over... Oh, now we're out of time in this segment. But just to round off, without getting overtly technical, this yet again signals what started in the Francis pontificate and is continuing under the Leonine pontificate in terms of economic and financial clarity, and to ensure that, in this case, legal accountability is upheld. I'm talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We're talking about church news and current events in light of church teaching. We were just talking about Pope Leo returning to live in the papal apartments, and the Vatican court ordering a partial retrial in what was called the trial of the century, a finance case involving London assets. Continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We're talking about church news. Matthew, to fast forward to yet another piece of news. This has to do with Cardinal Blase a critic of Cardinal Blase Cupich, Loyola University Chicago law professor John Breen. What's going on here? What do we know about this?
Yeah, well, if we go back a couple of months, almost 6 months really, we had the rather significant controversy surrounding the decision on the part of the Archdiocese of Chicago, under the leadership of Cardinal Blase Cupich, to give an award to Senator Richard Durbin, the long-standing Senate Democrat from Illinois, who has quite significantly a long-standing record in the support of things like abortion. And the granting him of this Lifetime Achievement Award really provoked a lot of controversy around the United States among bishops and other things. But one of the more pointed criticisms of the decision came from a member of what is called the Catholic Conference of Illinois, the board of directors. And now, for those who may not be familiar, Catholic conferences are basically organizations that assist the bishops of a region or a state in promoting Catholic affairs and giving advice and other things. So they play a fairly significant role, especially in confronting or dealing with things like legislation and activities on the state level. Now, a member of that board was leading that criticism, and his name was John Breen. He's a Loyola University Chicago law professor who had served on the Catholic Conference of Illinois Board of Directors since 2012, and he was, by the reporting of the National Catholic Register, being involuntarily phased out of his role. And that's an important use of phrase because he's basically being pushed out, and clearly, let's just say it's not voluntary on his part. And the Register was able to confirm the actions of the board, and then also confirmed basically that they reached out to Breen, who said no and provided no further comment when asked if leaving the board was his decision.
The CCI made a statement about Breen's departure. What do we know from that?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. So the board itself noted changes to its governance procedures, and so that we recognize the sacrifice of time and talent each member makes, and have amended our governance to require a staggered membership cycle for board members. So here we have a board on public policy, and made the decision that two of its longest-serving members would be rotating off after 7 two-year terms. Now, the Register is also able to confirm separately that another member by the name of Michael Fitzgerald, who's an accountant, who's based in the Diocese of Springfield, is another lay board member whose tenure is being brought to an end. So the bylaws themselves, and sorry, again, we're dealing with many technical issues today, basically were amended in 2023 so that 6 lay leaders are selected by Illinois diocesan ordinaries for 2-year terms, and they can come from any of the dioceses in Illinois. But term limits nor a staggered membership cycle were previously mentioned in the bylaws, nor do the bylaws in any way appear to have been previously enforced. So let's just put it this way, that certain changes were implemented, and enforcement of lay board member terms in the first place have led basically to the non-renewal of Breen's membership on the board. So the timing of this coming 6 months or so after the very sharp and public criticism of the Chicago Archdiocese for giving this Lifetime Achievement Award, I think many people would view that timing as somewhat obvious.
As disheartening as this situation is, are there going to be further developments, or will this be as much as we will know about the issue?
I suspect, barring other people coming forward, that this is probably the end of this phase of the story. So we'll just have to see.
Well, then we have to move on then to yet another disheartening situation that has to do with the Iran conflict. And thankfully, it's not just the National Catholic Register has done a lot of good work to shed light on what's happening in Lebanon as well. So what's going on there? Help us understand this.
Yeah, so one of the ways to think about the very significant conflict that is happening certainly over the skies of Iran, and the efforts on the part of the Trump administration to bring down the Iranian Islamist regime, is that because of the tendrils of Iran's reach, especially its proxies and the money that it has poured into other organizations. We have the militias, for example, in Iraq. We have Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization in Lebanon. That they are now also players in what is a mounting regional conflict. The results of that is that we now have conflicts in Iraq, but in particular, we have fighting in Lebanon. Essentially, Hezbollah is at war with Israel, has been for some time. They had already been significantly degraded in the last couple of years by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, as a consequence of Hezbollah's engagement with Israel during the aftermath of the October 7th terror attack by Hamas into Israel. So the group itself had been degraded, but was already in a process of rebuilding, largely with funds and support from Iran. Well, the results of this new fighting are pretty depressing. They're shocking in some ways, because we had on UWTN News Nightly just last night the head of the Order of Malta in Lebanon, who was been on the ground, and he was reporting that at least 1 million people have been displaced as a result of this new fighting in Lebanon. And it comes at a time when Lebanon is already suffering from very severe economic problems, as well financial problems, and the lingering effects of war, and the massive influx of refugees from neighboring countries like Syria. So this regional conflict, as it continues to grow, is creating some very, very significant problems in Lebanon.
As we continue to assess these regional problems, it's not just Lebanon that's suffering, even though, like you mentioned, it is rather severe there. What do we know about other nations within the region?
Well, we know that in the immediate aftermath of the air campaign on the part of the United States and Israel, that Iran replied by launching massive numbers of what has been accumulating for a very long time of missiles and drones. And the size of the attack, I don't think it took anyone by surprise, because certainly Israeli and U.S. intelligence was well aware of the stockpiles that Iran had of this weaponry. But I think the region was rather shocked when Iran began attacking what had been fairly friendly neighbors all through the Gulf region. So the Gulf states themselves, Qatar and Abu Dhabi and elsewhere, the UAE, all fell under attack. And as a result, too, of these drones and missiles over Israel, you have had many civilian casualties and some pretty near misses. The one that I think was most alarming for Christians, for Catholics, was that elements or parts of a missile landed in or on the roof of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which for us, of course, is one of the most sacred places on the face of the earth. So the scale of this is something that we're watching very closely, and we need to keep praying for the people of Lebanon, for the whole region.
Thank you so much, my friend, for making the time to talk with us about all these important pieces of news.
Privilege to be with you, really is.
My guest has been Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. I share his concern for the regional conflicts of the Middle East. Let us pray for resolution and lasting peace. I'm Marcus Peter.